In today's video, I'm going to explain wampum, wampum beads, their meaning, and their history. Wampum, for starters, a lot of people have heard of the word wampum, but they don't really know what it means. Wampum is a type of bead made by woodland Native Americans and was often woven together to create belts. And these belts had very symbolic and important meanings. And many times they weren't really belts that you wore around, but rather belts that were used as a basis for a principle and were used as more of a visual aid to an ideology and less as jewelry or a belt that you actually physically wore. Later on it became incredibly common to see belts worn like that, but that's not how they really started, and that's not the significance that they held. And another thing that a lot of people believe is they hear wampum and they think that wampum was a trade item, was like a currency. That's not necessarily the case. Wampum was never used like a currency like today we have the US dollar, but it was rather used as a very important trade item. Now, wampum originally came about, as legend has it, by the peacemaker. And the peacemaker brought wampum beads and showed wampum beads the importance of wampums and the significance of peace to Hiawatha. And in doing so, Hiawatha learned to bring peace about, and by doing this he brought peace to the 5 Iroquois nations, later 6, that had been warring for many, many years. Wampum is a shell originally, as you can see here. These shells were taken and they were ground down into little squares, and these little squares were then taken by a drill and woven out to make a bead. And this was a very long, tedious, hard process. Originally this was done with stone drills or reed drills. It would later be replaced with metal tools. And these shells, they have a coloration of purple, blue, and white. Original wampum beads. You probably can't see this, and I apologize for that. But original wampum beads were small, and they were circular, and they were very smooth, and they had a lot of detail in them. There was white ones and the purple and the blue ones, and these ones were obviously much more valuable due to the fact that the shell has more white than it does any other color. Now that's what original wampum was made of. And that's what was used originally to weave belts. Now later, when French and English traders came along, they saw the significance of wampum to Native Americans, and they saw them making belts. So they realized that they could reproduce that into glass beads, which were much easier to make and much cheaper. But they lacked the detail. There was no detail in them, there was no lines, nothing like that. They were, however, smooth, just like wampum, shell beads. But that kind of threw wampum all out of whack as far as trade went. But it did allow for a lot of Native Americans in the woodland regions to start wearing wampum more commonly in leg belts and necklaces, bracelets. Where prior to that, wampum was either only worn by very important figures or mostly only used as ceremonial belts. Now, nowadays, they also have a production of wampum that's made of like a clay. Now, this is probably the closest thing you can get to realistic wampum without actually having real wampum. Because it does have that detail with the lines and things in the beads, and it's sort of smooth, but it feels rather different than actual wampum beads, like the ones I have here. But wampum was, like I mentioned, woven into belts and things, and these belts had some very important meanings, so I'm going to go over a couple of them now. One of the most common, well-known belts you see here is the Iroquois Confederacy belt, and this represents the 5 nations of the Iroquois with the tree, with the center white tree in the middle, which was very significant, important, and that was the Onondaga. And then the other squares represented the Oneida, the Cayuga, the Mohawk, and the Seneca. And this became a very important belt, and this is the belt that pretty much made the Iroquois Confederacy and brought the 5 tribes together. It's a very commonly seen belt or symbol. Some other significant belts to history was this belt. Now this is a war belt. This belt would be presented among the council and brought out whenever there was talk of going to war with another tribe or even a white occupying party. These belts, like I said, were brought out when war was being discussed. And often, when a tribe would invite another tribe to war, they would send out a belt with a carrier. And these belts would be red, dyed red, like this one here. And here's another example of a wampum bracelet where you can see the beads have been dyed red. So, you know, you could have other colors. It didn't just have to be blue and white, but that's the real traditional colors, and that's the what was most common. So you have another belt here, and this belt kind of represents the 2 rivers or 2 trails or 2 paths, what have you. And this belt here was, to the best of my explaining abilities, when the white man came to this nation, the Iroquois kind of made this to show one trail being the white way of life, the European style colonization, and another trail being the Iroquois way of life, the native, the indigenous, the red road, what have you. And the ideology was that they would stay on their side, and then the Iroquois would stay on their side. They'd run parallel together, but never ever intermingle. And that was the ideology of that belt. Another common thing you'd see here is, in this belt here, all the belts I showed you previous to this were made of glass wampum. This one here is actually made of the clay wampum reproduction. No belt I've showed you today was actual genuine wampum, because I'm not skilled enough to make wampum myself, and wampum beads can go from $3 to $6 per belt, and per bead I mean. And this belt here happens to have a couple hundred beads, so you can realize how that becomes rather expensive rather quickly. But here's another belt. Well, this is more of a bracelet, but this has a very significant design of the 3 symbols, and a lot of times belts would have 3 symbols or 3 designs in them, and a lot of times that would date back into the ideology of the 3 sisters among the Iroquois Confederacy, which were 3 crops: corn, beans, and squash. So a lot of belts you'll see will have 3 of something, and a lot of times that's what it's paying reference to. But here's just another belt here. A bracelet, not belt, apology. You'll see here, just one woven with the clay beads, and a lot of times these would be worn, like I said, once glass beads came available. A lot of times they started just being worn by many Native Americans. Sometimes you'd even see belts being used to hold things, such as here's a belt being used as the strap for a powder horn. So you did see them being used as straps and things, or maybe even leg ties, as you can see I'm wearing here. So they had many uses other than being just a belt or a necklace. You would even see a lot of Europeans starting to copy them and wear them, such as the long hunters. They would start to wear wampum. Whether that was done to impress Native Americans they may have ran into, or whether it was done because they personally just began to enjoy the pattern and see the beauty in wampum, I couldn't really tell you, but they were definitely done. But that was just a quick little video. I wanted to take a moment and explain how wampum was made from actual shells, and how it would be woven together to make belts, and how these belts could have many important meanings to the Iroquois. There are many more belts I didn't cover, but I thought I'd just give you a couple quick belts today. The Iroquois Confederacy belt, a war belt, and the 2 rose belt. These are just some really popular belts that you've seen, that you may have seen or may you would see back in the day among Native Americans. I hope you enjoyed my video today. I apologize. I hope I can put out more videos in the future. I'm going to try. Please hit that like and subscribe button. It means a lot to me, and have a wonderful day.